is, look, what do we know? We know that in a hospital like this, a neonatal unit like this, 2, 3, 4 babies will die every year because they're fragile, because they're really, really vulnerable. I think the balance of probabilities is that she's innocent, not that she's guilty.
Really?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, we are back to Lucy Letby. Now, Dr. Michael Hall, a retired consultant neonatologist and visiting professor in neonatal medicine, he advised Letby's legal team. He's written to the inquiry maintaining his opinion that Lucy did not receive a fair trial and that, quote-unquote, important elements of the medical evidence presented by the prosecution were flawed or misleading. Is he right? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Some of you may remember that about a year ago, I did a series of 18 videos on the Lucy Letby case. And it does go into quite a lot of detail. So if you're interested in my analysis, dealing with motive, dealing with her psychology, dealing with how she was caught, dealing with her handwriting and all that kind of thing, have a look at the playlist. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button and let's get started. So I'm going to do a quick review of the latest news and then I'm going to provide my assessment of it, right? So there has been a growing chorus of late to relitigate the Lucy Letby case. There's this article from Peter Hitchens in The Spectator adding to calls saying that Letby's trial was unfair. The noise has become so loud, even the relatively dry and factual mediascape that is the Financial Times has weighed in, warning about misunderstanding statistics in the courtroom.
This is rumour control, here are the facts.
Number one, Lucy Letby has been convicted not of one crime, but of 7 counts of murder and 8 counts of attempted murder. That's 15 charges related to murder and attempted murder. That is a lot. Number two, Letby applied to appeal her conviction, but this was denied. Number three, the inquiry into the UK hospital where a nurse killed 7 babies will not review evidence against her. And then number four, Lucy Letby is not going anywhere.
Of the 22 counts on which Letby was tried, she was not convicted on all of them. She was actually convicted on 15. That's after the retrial.
Joining us now is Philip David, who is Emeritus Professor of Statistics at the University of Cambridge.
Now, it's interesting that you've got this Professor of Statistics speaking, he thinks, intelligently saying, wow, there were 22 charges, but they could only pin 15 onto her. Wow, that's blah, blah, blah. Well, if you think of Rex Heuermann, they've only been able to pin 4 or connect 4 murders to him. That is kind of how the law works. And so to apply raw statistical probability in that sense and say, well, you know, the statistical correlation here or the statistical matching isn't 100%. It never is when it comes to the law because it is so hard to prove certain things with limited evidence. And so to say that, I mean, this is not comparing apples with apples. So what I find astonishing are the number of folks coming into the conversation after the fact, the Johnny-come-latelys, who are suddenly influential legal experts and in some cases, like this one, expert statisticians. I agree with Lady Justice Thirlwall, the prosecutor, who says people who are only weighing in now are simply not fully or properly informed. The Guardian quoted her saying, in the months since the Court of Appeal judgment, which in May refused Letby leave to appeal, there's been a huge outpouring of comment from a variety of quarters on the validity of the convictions. But as far as I'm aware, it has come entirely from people who were not at the trial. And that is important to be aware of the full context and the full story, not just an element of it. I covered the trial extensively, and as per usual, I had no horse in the race. As far as I'm concerned, Lucy Letby's conviction was reasonable and rational, and let's be clear, fair. Now, all of this noise has caused additional enormous stress for the parents of the babies who have suffered far too much. It's not for me to set about reviewing the convictions. The Court of Appeal has done that with a very clear result. The convictions stand. That again was Lady Justice Stilwell. I really want to focus this brief analysis on a story published in the Financial Times from a writer who fancies herself as someone who knows the criminal mind, or seems to. And these are her words. For those interested in the legal use of scientific and mathematical evidence, well, that's me, the Lucy Letby case is grimly compelling. Letby, a former neonatal nurse, is serving a life sentence for murdering 7 premature babies at Cheshire Hospital. Since then, and I'm still reading from the same article, and with a statutory public inquiry into the events beginning this week, theories have circulated alleging an unsafe conviction. It would be wrong for this column to attempt to relitigate the case. Yeah, absolutely. It would be wrong. Now, I can't help interpreting that as a science commentator for a financial publication coming across the media noise in the aftermath of a trial. How? Well, in social media and in the media. And then getting sucked into that noise, and then more particularly finding various theories. What happens when you're dealing with a criminal case and there are various theories surrounding it? Those are what are properly known as conspiracies. And what is the word that she uses to describe these theories? Compelling. She's right to say that it would be wrong for her column to relitigate the case. The Financial Times expertise is definitely not in the law, except that she goes on to do exactly that, but by glossing over the details. She says, quote, "It would also be wrong to gloss over known shortcomings in how scientific and statistical evidence is gathered and presented in court." Yes, but you can't gloss over one thing in order to gloss over another. She goes on to say, several eminent statisticians have raised such concerns of late while making no claims as to Letby's guilt or innocence. Now, the writer is correct in examining the possibility of correlation and being cautious about that because, yes, correlation is not causation, certainly not always. But in courtrooms, we don't examine statistics in a vacuum. Statistics are but one tool to look at within a cornucopia of other contextual evidence. So, for example, the Ramsey case, what are the statistics regarding the likelihood of an external person killing someone who's found dead in the house? The question which also arises is whether the statistics in the Letby case reinforce the overall mosaic. And so if you don't know what the overall mosaic is, then it's difficult to really make an intelligent argument about it from the periphery, from this perspective of, I'm a little bit concerned our statistics may have been used here. Anyway, she goes on to say, gathering evidence after identifying a suspect introduces the risk of confirmation bias. Even well-meaning investigators can end up unconsciously elevating information that reinforces a theory while discounting pointers to the contrary. There might be so-called confounding variables at play too. That is something we've got to consider in the whole Bayesian yacht scenario. Now, all of this is true, but that doesn't make statistical evidence any more special than any other evidence when it comes to a criminal case. This whole thing of confirmation bias and unconsciously elevating information, that is true of any evidence and all evidence when you're dealing with an investigation. So please don't elevate statistics to some sort of make or break level. And then I want to highlight what she says here. She talks about the prosecutor's fallacy. In her article, she writes, by analogy, there are millions of health workers globally, and an unlucky few, these are her words, an unlucky few might be linked to death clusters. And this just speaks to me of a total ignorance of the reality in terms of crimes and criminals and the healthcare setting, right? So I agree in principle that statistics can be misleading or one-sided, which is why we need to see them in the proper context, because a conversation about statistics wouldn't be complete.
Wasn't nearly close to being in the same vicinity as complete.
Without applying statistics broadly to our subject matter. And what is our subject matter? It is a healthcare worker in a healthcare setting that is accused of being a serial killer. Now, it's just my opinion, but I highly doubt that our conscientious objector knows the proportion of female serial killers that work in healthcare professions. Have you applied statistical analysis to that? Statistical probability to that? Well, the answer is it's almost half. It's a very high proportion. The Daily Mail described a book by a certain Dr. Harrison, Just as Deadly, The Psychology of Female Serial Killers. And they note that through her research, she found 39%, almost 40% of female mass killers work in healthcare professions. Now, as high as this number is, almost 1 out of every 2 female serial killers is a healthcare worker. As high as that number is, I suspect the true number to be substantially higher, perhaps instead of 40%, something like closer to perhaps 2/3, around about 60%. That's just in my opinion. The reason I said is it is in a healthcare setting, when people die, the first thing people think isn't that they were murdered. And so I think a lot of people have gotten away with murder, especially female killers in this healthcare setting, because of this bias that, oh no, we do trust the healthcare worker. Now, the other thing that was said in this Financial Times article, I'll put a link to it in the description, flawed statistics contributed to the wrongful 1999 conviction of Sally Clark for murdering her 2 sons, not 1 son, 2. Jurors were told there was only a 1 in 73 million chance of the babies dying naturally. The numbers were wrong. Clark was later cleared. These are her words, right? Now, this is another misinterpretation from the columnist. A legal finding is not necessarily legal fact. If O.J. Simpson is acquitted of murder, doesn't mean he is officially, factually innocent of a crime. It means the legal finding is the legal finding. Now, often the law is based on facts and the law is factual. Certainly we would hope so. But there are many cases where there's simply insufficient evidence to prove something. There is evidence, right? But it doesn't meet that very high bar of beyond reasonable doubt. And so although it's factual, it doesn't reach a certain standard. That doesn't mean it is now legally factual, that something hasn't been proved to be true one way or the other, right? In the Amanda Knox case, and Knox herself often says, there isn't any evidence to prove I'm guilty. But the correct statement is actually that the evidence that was used to prove was arguably insufficient. That the evidence is there, it's just insufficient, not that there's no evidence. That's a totally different argument. Okay, insufficient does not mean no evidence. It means the evidence that does exist wasn't sufficient to meet a particular bar, certainly in this case. I think there are cases where there is no evidence, and usually those cases don't even go to trial because there's not even probable cause, right? And so there is a high bar of proving one's case beyond a reasonable doubt. And so think about it, when a criminal covers up their crimes, it immediately creates doubt. You know, there could be some other explanation here because some evidence that should be there is missing. And all of this makes the job of proving the case doubly or triply even more burdensome, because now you're not only proving your case, you've got to interrogate and understand the cover-up operation as well. You've got to try and find explanations for all of the evidence holes that are occurring all over the place, because evidence has been wiped away, covered up, distorted or manipulated in some way. And this is why we so often say on this channel, the absence of evidence is also evidence. I want to end off by quoting this paragraph from the Financial Times, where I think the Financial Times writer really reveals her hand, right? She writes, Other potential solutions include employing independent statisticians in complex cases, educating lawyers and judges on statistical pitfalls, and guiding juries on how to read the numbers. I don't have a problem with any of that. Change must come. The current cluster of expert concern is too great to be a coincidence. Now, how I understand what she's saying, then I could be misunderstanding, is that she's saying change must come to the Letby case, and that the current cluster of expert concern around the Letby case is of too great concern to be a coincidence. In other words, she seems to be implying Lucy's innocent. She bases her bias in the Letby case on the very unscientific gut feel. Again, this is how I understand what she's saying, that where there are a lot of experts expressing concern, that's too great to be a coincidence. But what was she saying earlier about correlation? I'm sorry, doctors and Financial Times writers aren't experts in the criminal mind, right? And there are very few who are. Even those whose meat and potatoes, their daily bread is about the crime, very few people truly have a grip on what the criminal mind is. So Lucy Letby isn't going anywhere, but statistics, I believe, will be playing an increasing role in criminal cases, and they should. It's already used extensively in DNA analysis, but there's so much room for more. And what we said earlier, I'm not sure if you caught it, this whole Bayesian statistical model is something that has got more and more application in today's modern world. In terms of algorithms and AI and all the rest. But for statistics to work, we need to be as dispassionate as the numbers, kind of like the blindfolded Lady Justice herself.
Well, what's the trick then?
The trick, William Potter, is not minding that it hurts.
I'm not going to take it further than that. Please let me know in the comments what you think about all of this. Do you think Lucy Letby deserves an appeal? Another thing I want to ask you is, do you want me to cover the curious case of Sally Clark? It was someone who was highlighted by this Financial Times writer, basically saying that that was a total miscarriage of justice. Would you like me to deal with that particular case? And then finally, I'm also going to be covering the Van Gogh letters. I think, are we at episode 88 now, somewhere around there, on the Team Peachtree channel, where we'll be looking at the letters that he wrote in September. And this is when he was at a really low ebb in terms of his mental health. So you don't want to miss that. We'll also look briefly at some contemporary art news in terms of exhibitions that are taking place right now related to Vincent van Gogh's work. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.